As you can tell from your handout, we're looking at Judges chapter 14 tonight. Hopefully everybody's read that beforehand. Got a little bit better discussion if that be the case. Question number 1 on our handout, kind of some of the things that are an idea that we're going to deal with tonight. But the question is, what are some techniques or methods that people use to persuade others to do something they don't want to do? Okay, let's start with positive. Let's start with a positive. Are there any positive methods or techniques that people use to help make somebody do what they don't want to?
Bribery or reward.
Okay, reward.
Bribery.
Bribery. Well, I don't know if that's positive, but okay, make them think it's their idea. That's certainly an effective method, isn't it? Any others that you can think of?
You could just try to reason with them.
Okay, sometimes you use reasoning or logic, right? Try to get somebody to do what they don't want to do. How about kindness? Is that a method or technique? Yeah, there's a lot of different positive ways that we can try to influence people to do something that they don't want to do. Okay, so what are some of the negative ways? Threats, okay.
Guilt.
Okay, killing somebody, physical harm.
Guilt.
Oh, guilt. Sorry. Oh, I think they're both effective. So, yeah, I'm deaf in one ear and can't hear out the other, so you have to excuse me. Guilt. Okay. What else?
Threats.
Okay, threats. Any other negative ways you can think of? How about nagging? Would that be a negative way? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to read about a couple of different people tonight that did something that they didn't really want to do, and a certain method or technique was used in order to get them to do that. Let's see if we can pick up on that as we go through chapter 14 tonight. I'm going to start by reading the first 4 verses. Of course, we started last week with Samson, and that's going to be kind of the focus of our study over the next several weeks here. But in chapter 14, beginning in verse 1, it says, "Now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. So he went up and told his father and mother, saying, I have seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me as a wife. Then his father and mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren or among all my people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, Get her for me, for she pleases me well. But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. For at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel." So obviously we're reading about Samson and marriage that took place in this chapter. There's some other interesting ideas and thoughts along the way, though. But question number 1, or number 2, is what resulted from Samson's visit to Timnah?
Saw a pretty girl.
Yeah, so Samson sees this woman, right? He's obviously captivated by this woman. I think it's interesting that the Bible says there in verse 1 that he saw a woman. He didn't meet a woman, he saw a woman. So what does that kind of indicate to you? Probably not. You know, he probably just noticed this woman, and I don't know that he had any interaction with her at all. But he was captivated by her beauty, obviously. That's what he saw about it. That was what attracted him to her in the first place. And he became so infatuated with her that he wanted to marry her. So the question becomes this: why would Samson want to marry this Philistine woman? Because she was a faithful follower of God's law, right? Is that what attracted Samson to her? Yeah, physical beauty, right? That's going to be Samson's main concern here. And so, is physical beauty alone a good reason to marry? Well, what happens if you marry for physical beauty?
It fades.
It fades, right? If you know the only thing that a person is looking for in marriage is physical beauty, then what happens when a more beautiful person comes along? Well, they're going to say, well, this beauty over here is faded away. I need somebody more beautiful. And that's going to be their goal in marriage. Now, it's not to say that physical beauty shouldn't be a part of marriage. Physical attraction, I guess we should say. But it's not everything that there is to marriage. And so a marriage, the Bible talks about the idea of a marriage that's based on outward beauty. That beauty is vain. It's going to be empty, meaningless. And if that's the case with what you've married for, then your marriage is going to be vain and empty and meaningless. So he sees this woman. He's attracted to her outward beauty. He immediately wants to marry her. So question number 3 here, how does Samson approach his parents about what he wanted?
Take care of it.
Yeah, he asked nicely, right? No, what does he do? Yeah, he basically says, listen, this is how it's going to be. Okay, you guys go down there and you get me this woman because I want to marry this woman. Now, what was unusual about that for this day and age?
Usually they're arranged marriage.
Yeah, usually the parents decided who their children were going to marry, didn't they? I mean, that was just the custom of that day and age. They at least had a very strong say in who their children were going to marry here. And remember, we studied about Manoah and his wife last week. They got this message from God that they were supposed to raise this judge and deliverer of Israel. And obviously, they want him to be what God wants him to be. They want him to walk according to the law of God, right? So they are not at all on board with Samson marrying this woman. Why would they be opposed to it?
It's against the law of God.
Yeah, it's a violation of God's law, right? These are the people that God said, don't intermarry. Don't mingle with these people. Don't form relationships. If you start forming these relationships, they're going to pull your heart away from me and you're going to worship these other idols and serve these other gods. And so it's unusual, for a child to just walk up and demand this of their mother and father. But I think that tells us a lot about the character of Samson. I think you can see a lot of that as you study him through these chapters. He's a pretty headstrong individual, wasn't he? Wouldn't you say? Everybody shake your head like this. Maybe you'll agree with me by the end if you don't think so now. All right, so question number 4. What does Samson's parents' response reveal about their feelings about just the Philistines in general? Much less the woman he wanted to marry.
Well, they didn't like him.
Yeah, they of course, we pointed out, they strongly objected to Samson marrying this woman because they knew it was against the law of God, right? Samson he's going to do what he wanted to do. He didn't care what his parents thought. He didn't care what anybody else thought. He said, this is the woman I want to marry. You go down and you get this set up for me, But they call them uncircumcised. Now, we studied about circumcision, of course, in the Old Testament. What was circumcision? What was the purpose of it? Why did God establish that?
Set his people apart, identify them as special.
Yeah, it was basically a sign, wasn't it? A mark or a token, we might say, that a person was in a covenant relationship with God. And so obviously when they're talking about these uncircumcised Philistines, they're talking about these people who are not in a covenant relationship with God. That's the point that they're making there. So they strongly objected because, of course, they didn't follow God's law. They weren't children of God. They weren't obedient to His law, and certainly weren't in a covenant relationship with Him. So why does Samson, question number 5 here, why does Samson refuse to listen to his parents' advice? You'll not find it in the scripture, but you just use your head a little bit and tell me.
You said it, he was a headstrong. And lust, somebody said lust.
Yeah, he was a very worldly minded individual, wasn't he? I think you can glean that from studying his life.
But he was Nazarite from birth. That's what. And so far, we don't see any Nazarite in this guy. I mean, what?
Yeah, he didn't. I think his parents raised him like they were supposed to raise him, but I just think, every individual has a choice to make in life. And you can try to direct people down the right path. You can say all the right things and teach them all the right things. But if they don't want to walk down that path, they're not going to walk down it. And I think Samson, when you read about him, you bring up the Nazirite vow, and it'll come up some more in this chapter. I don't think he cared one bit that he had this Nazirite vow. I think he broke it numerous times that we read about. Yes, sir.
So, obviously they raised him with this Nazarite vow. Do you think they explained to him, growing up, the purpose, that he was meant to be raised up as a judge of Israel? I mean, because his behavior lends the idea, we see it a lot in the modern world, the sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to it, I deserve it, therefore I want it, and I'm going to act.
Yeah. Could be.
I mean, it'd be hard to say you're going to follow all these Nazarite vows that your mother made for you before you were born without, at some point, the conversation being, because God told us to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they certainly taught him right from wrong.
Well,
Would you
I'm
agree
sure
with
they
that?
taught him well, but I'm just thinking if he's wandering around going, I'm here because God wanted me here, and I'm going to be, that maybe that entitlement idea is how he got some heads wrong.
Yeah, and that's certainly a possibility. I think we pointed out last week, the end there of chapter 13, verse 25. It says the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him during this particular time. And I kind of made mention of that before, because when you read about the Spirit of God coming on him, a couple other times in the story of his life, it's this idea of powerful strength. He's able to do this great feat. And so maybe, people who are tremendously talented and gifted in ability sometimes think, well, I can do anything I want, and that may have been the mindset that Samson had.
I've never understood. He's supposed to be the judge or deliverer for Israel against the Philistines and those oppressing his people. Why would the masters give their daughter to the slaves as a wife?
Yeah.
I never understood that. Because right now they're the ruling class, right?
Yeah.
The Philistines are oppressing the Israelites. My daughter's a Philistine. Why am I giving them an Israelite?
Yeah. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know that we got a good answer in the scripture, but yeah, it'd be good what's the word I'm looking for? Interesting. That's it. Getting old here. I can't remember anything. Interesting. Yeah, interesting to know the thinking and the logic behind it. So it's pretty obvious that he's selfish. He's a worldly-minded individual. Pretty disrespectful toward his parents, that he doesn't even consider what they're telling him. Obviously disrespectful toward the law of God, because it's a violation of it. And so he chooses not to listen to the voice of experience and wisdom. So question number 6 is, how does the Lord use Samson's sinful desires to fulfill his purposes?
That I don't understand.
Okay.
That verse really puzzles me.
What was God looking for?
A fight.
Yeah, he was looking for somebody to fight for him, wasn't he? Fight against the Philistines. And so Samson, he uses this desire that Samson has, which is to marry this Philistine woman. He uses this to create kind of conflict or division between Samson and the Philistines, right? We're going to read about that a little bit later on here. So again, you kind of have this idea. I know I mention it from time to time, but can God use evil people and evil choices to accomplish his will? Sure. Absolutely, right? God, the wisdom of God is an amazing thing, but he can use anybody to accomplish his will. That's the nature of God. So he's using Samson. He's going to use this desire that he has, and this attitude that he has to create this division between the Philistines and Israel. So we're not going to read all this chapter, but if you go on, you'll read about Samson making his way down to meet this woman. What happens? Question number 7 here. What happens to Samson on the way to Timnah? Yeah, one of the first things that we read about is he's attacked by a lion, right? Or almost, I guess, attacked by a lion. Now, why do you think he'd be attacked by a lion?
Well, it's supposed to be pretty powerful, and it probably put the fear in a lot of people. But, the
maybe somebody would say, well, it was old and feeble. If you didn't say young. I don't know. Go ahead, brother.
I think the entire purpose of the lion is so that he can have the riddle.
So he can what?
The riddle.
Okay.
I mean,
That's
without that, there's no riddle, and without the riddle, there's not him killing 30. There's not all the stuff that comes after that.
Yeah. So what's interesting is where is Samson when this lion attacks him? A vineyard. What's Samson doing at a vineyard? Right? He's got a Nazirite vow, which means what? No grape products at all, right? And it's also interesting, you read there in verse 5, he goes down to Timnah with his father and mother. But at this particular point in the story, his father and his mother aren't with him, right? Do you agree with that? Yeah, because he doesn't tell them about any of this. So evidently they weren't there. When they're not around, where's Samson? He's at a vineyard. Right? Why do you think the lion came and attacked him? Think this might be the providence of God? Think it might be trying to give him a wake-up call here? Say, hey, what are you doing out here? You know? I don't know.
God gave him the strength to kill the lion.
He did, yeah. Because God wanted to use it, right? He had a plan for him and a purpose in mind. So, we read about the young lion. Again, verse 6, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. Again, denoting miraculous power. He empowers him to kill this lion. He tore the lion apart as one that would have torn apart a young goat. But, if you notice the last part of verse 6, he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Why did he not tell his mother or his father? Because he was so humble, right? He was where he wasn't supposed to be, right? And he didn't want his mom and his dad to know about it. So he didn't tell them about any of these things. So question number 8 is, how was Samson able to kill that lion with his bare hands? Yeah, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. Literally, I think that's what the original language says. It's kind of like this idea, you know, Samson's in trouble and all of a sudden the Spirit of God rushes upon him and empowers him so that he can kill this lion. So that was his first trip there to Timnah. Well, I guess it was the second trip technically. So question number 9, what happens to his second trip? I've got there his third to Timnah. Went back the same way, right? What did he decide he's going to do?
Check out his kill.
Yeah. Why would he go look? Maybe relive the moment, right? Hey, does this really happen? You know, I got to see this once again. It is interesting. Also, I was reading in here in verse 8. Of course, we're reading about him walking on the road to Timnah, but it says he turned aside. So this vineyard evidently wasn't on the main route, right? He had to depart from the main route in order to get to this vineyard. But he turns aside to see the carcass of the lion. And when he does that, what does he find? Yeah, a beehive, right? A beehive is in the carcass, and there's honey in the carcass too, on the beehive. And so Samson takes the honey, he eats the honey, and he also gives the honey to his mom and dad. Question, what was, we talked about the Nazirite vow, right? What were the qualifications of the Nazirite vow? What are the characteristics?
Not to touch a dead animal.
Not to become unclean, right? What was a dead animal? They were not to touch anything dead, right? What happens to food if it touches something unclean? What was the law in the Old Testament? Unclean. The food becomes unclean, right? And if you eat the food, you become unclean, right? So here again you have Samson. Is he taking his Nazirite vow seriously? No. He becomes unclean by eating of this honey because it's touched the carcass of a dead animal. He also gives it to his mom and dad, right? In verse 9, the end says, though, but he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. Why didn't he tell them? Because they would have been unclean, right? They wouldn't have eaten of it if he told them where he'd taken it from. But here again, you have Samson violating his Nazirite vow, which again just shows us it wasn't something that he took very seriously at all. So let's see here.
Doesn't that sound like a lot of late teens, early 20s guys today?
Yeah,
I mean, they're sort of rebelling, figuring it out on their own.
yeah.
That's not new.
Yeah, but that was really Samson all his life. he never really figured it out to the end, I think. But you know, I think that's just the kind of person he was, the kind of character that he was. So he goes back to celebrate his wedding. And question number 10 here: how does Samson? I've gotten his family in there, but maybe I shouldn't have put that in there. But how did Samson celebrate his wedding?
Peace.
Yeah, he throws a feast. How long does this feast last? 7 days, yeah, a week. What do you think happened at that feast? Who was present?
The in-laws.
Yeah. The main characters that you read about are mainly Philistine characters, aren't they? So, even Samson, does he have any of his own friends there?
Not any from his tribe, anyway.
No.
He may have friends there.
He's got 30 companions, right? But where does he get these 30 companions?
They brought 30 companions to be with him.
Yeah, so basically these are enemies, the Philistines, that have been brought to Samson to kind of be his friends for this whole week, for these 7 days. A lot of commentators bring up the idea that this is a drinking party, and it is true that sometimes when you read about this word in the Hebrew language, it refers to intoxicating drink, but it also doesn't sometimes. But if I were wagering the Philistines, you think this was a drinking party? I would imagine it was. You think Samson partook if it was? And I don't think he has any problem drinking product of a grape. Do you? Or eating from a grape? We just read about him being in the vineyard. Yes, sir.
I don't know if it answer kind of a question or not about why the Philistines would want their daughter to marry Samson. One of the things I read was the fact that Samson's mom and dad, parents been able to do a party for 30 people. Their mindset was that they were probably rich. The Philistines looked at them being rich. So maybe an answer. I don't know.
Money would be an answer, yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. So basically, 7-day party, right? Probably drinking taking place there. Probably violated his vow again. And then Samson tells a riddle, right, at this wedding party. Why does he tell a riddle here?
Seems like he just wants to win easy money. Seems like he's going, I'm not trying to be funny.
I know,
I'm
yeah.
just- it seems like he's like, y'all are never going to get this, I'm going to take all your stuff.
Yeah, and you know, these people, these Philistines who would have been present at this party were probably family, and I don't know how many friends, but probably a lot of them were family of the bride, wouldn't you say?
Cousins.
Yeah, who were brought to be companions for Samson during this 7-day period. If you're trying to fit in with your in-laws, you know, if you're trying to put your best foot forward, it's probably not the smartest thing to do is take something from them right off, wouldn't you think? But I think Samson, you know, you read about the riddle there, he was pretty confident. Nobody's ever going to figure this one out, right? So what was his motivation for doing it? What'd you say, David?
Gambling. He figured it'd be easy money.
Yeah, greed.
Or it could be, you know, there are a lot of people who don't like their in-laws. He has no reason to like his in-laws. So it could be sort of that, get your bluff in, you know, new brother-in-law, and you're kind of, I'm rough with him. This is his way of trying to assert himself.
Yeah. I think he's going to have a laugh at everybody's expense, what he kind of thought. Maybe he thought, well, I'll show everybody how smart I am. You know? I don't know. There are probably a lot of reasons why Samson did what he did, but it's not a good start when you're just entering into a new family here. So what did Samson's companions do when they couldn't solve this riddle?
His wife.
Yeah, they enlisted the help of his wife, right? We talked about, remember the first question here that we looked at was, what are some techniques or methods that people use to make people do what they don't want to do? Did his wife want to get the answer from Samson?
She don't have to do nothing. She seemed pretty willing.
Okay, why did she do it?
They threatened to burn her.
And her family's house.
Yeah, they threatened to kill her and to burn up all their family's property if she didn't figure out this answer for them. They said, you know, did you invite us down to this marriage feast so you could take everything from us that we own? You know, you better find this out or else we're going to take care of you and your family.
They're pretty close family there.
Yeah, they were. Samson probably fit right in, didn't he? What reasoning does Samson's wife use on him to discover the answer to the riddle? Question 13. Guilt. And how did she guilt him? What did she claim?
Did she hate him? Did he hate her?
Yeah, you don't love me, right? If you loved me, you would tell me the answer to this riddle. Yeah. Yeah, classic, right? And not only that, but if you look back in verse 16, she weeps on him. You know, this goes on, verse 17. She wept on him the 7 days while the feast lasted. So you can just imagine her demeanor and her mindset through this is supposed to be a celebration. You know, and here she is, she's crying. She said, oh, you don't really love me. And finally, of course, Samson gives in, right? Why? Question 14 here. Why do you think Samson told her the answer to the riddle?
I think he was plumb dumb with women.
It is interesting that he points out in verse 16, he says to her, the last part of the verse, I have not explained it to my mother or my father. So should I explain it to you? You know? Do you think he trusted her? I think if he trusted her, he would have told her first thing, don't you? But I don't think he told her to try to build trust. I don't think that's what was going on here. He was a sucker for women, wasn't he? I mean, he was. I know when we were in a Bible camp this past year, we were teaching the young men's class. We do that every day, and we were talking about this. You know, this guy was undefeatable. There was nothing that anybody could ever do to break Samson. And the only person who ever broke Samson was a woman. 2 different occasions. So it tells you a little bit about the power that women can have in influencing over men, doesn't it? For good or evil. But anyway, she questioned his love for her for 7 days. You know, this guy could break chains. He could kill lions. But he couldn't overcome the tears of a woman. So it's just part of Samson's life. What did Samson do when the men solved this riddle? They come to him on the 7th day, kind of the last hour. They tell him the answer. How does he react?
Made him very mad.
Yeah, he lost it, didn't he? And that's another characteristic of Samson that you'll see. He was a hot-headed individual, wasn't he? Got angry very quickly. But he lost it. He charged the Philistines with cheating. He told them, you know, if you hadn't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have figured out the answer to the riddle. Now that's kind of a proverb in and of itself. Do people plow with heifers? No, you wouldn't use a heifer to plow. That'd be foolish to try to do that. But he's telling them you did something you weren't supposed to do. You know, and that's how you found it out. You cheated. I don't know how his wife felt about being called a heifer, but anyway, tells you again a little bit, I think, about the nature of Samson. So they won the riddle, but they lost 30 of their own countrymen, didn't they? Because Samson goes out and kills 30 Philistines to give them the undergarments and the outer garments that had been gambled upon for the answering this riddle.
I think he cleaned the blood off
I doubt it, do you? So question number 16 is, how would you characterize Samson? You know, we've kind of looked a little bit at his early life here. How would you describe it?
Egocentric.
Yeah, he's a very selfish individual, isn't he? I think that's pretty obvious. What are some other things that stand out about him?
He's a hothead.
He is a hothead, right? What else?
Doesn't take things through too well.
No, he doesn't really take much seriously, I don't think, do you? Would you say? Go ahead.
The guy's crazy.
Okay. Yeah. He may not be all there. Would deceptive be a good word describing?
I think it would, and I wonder if he killed the 30 Philistines to get the garments to pay off the bet, because he just made a bet he couldn't afford.
It could
And
be.
I mean, I know his family's got money, but that doesn't mean he has money.
Yeah.
And if he's deceptive and narcissistic, and maybe even part of why he's mad is because he couldn't afford to lose the bet.
Could be. Yeah, I think the fact that he goes to this vineyard, he doesn't tell his parents about it. He gets the honey, doesn't tell his parents where he got the honey. You know, he gives these guys this riddle, and he knows there's no way they could ever answer it, right? I think there's a lot of deception you can see in his life too. Greed, selfishness, worldly minded. There's a lot of different adjectives that can be used to describe Samson here. So question 17, the end of it here, which character traits of Samson would you like to have, and which would you rather avoid? See anything positive in his life that you'd like to have?
I wouldn't mind the long hair.
Oh, I didn't see that one coming.
He's a man of action.
He is a man of action. He's a man of courage, isn't he? I'll give him that, or foolishness, one or the other.
But if you're undefeatable, you have to have, you know what I'm saying? If you know nothing can physically defeat you, does that take courage to go into that battle? Like, I'm not going to get more fear. Let's go.
Maybe not. Go ahead, Daryl.
God was with him numerous times. And of course, he was using him for a purpose. And you were saying all these negative things. Samson, if you look at in chapter 15, he judged Israel for 20 years.
Yeah.
So he is, if he was a judge,
Yeah. Yeah. I think, again, God used him to accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. That was to deliver Israel out of the hand. He ended up, at the end, okay. But I think his early life, he was a pretty rough individual. So, all right, any other thoughts or comments before we end?